Go ahead and start.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Michael Kane, and I'm going to call to order for our Wednesday, January 13th, 2021 Solar Task Force meeting. I want to let people know I'm joining remotely, feeling a bit under the weather, and so I did not want to join in person. So please bear with me if I inadvertently get some things backwards, but I know everyone there will assist, so I'm sure this will go well. So to begin, I'd like to first take the roll. Bonnie Kellenberger.
Present.
Jeffrey Shaw.
Present.
Brian Thomas is not here, I believe.
That is correct.
Mike Thompson.
Here.
Okay, so we have a quorum today, and so we can begin with first the approval from the minutes from the December 9th, 2020 Solar Task Force meeting. Does everyone, do all the task force members have a copy of those?
We do.
I didn't see anything. I move that we approve these minutes.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Okay. Thank you very much. It sounds like that passed. Any nays?
No, sir.
There we go. So let's put that one in the books, please, for so we can move on to some of our old business. So I want to welcome everyone who's joining, and we'll get to you all in just a second. I wanted to first discuss some old business, the agenda for today. We're going to discuss principles first, and I'll suggest to the committee members that they open up their the draft principles that we have been discussing. And then from that, we'll really talk about some of the additional recommendations we have, some overview of the recommendation section, and we'll have a number of different things to work on today: residential, commercial, and a discussion of community. And I know we have some experts to weigh in on some of these topics. So if you would, I suggest everyone bring up, and I'm going to get it on my screen now, the draft principles document that Les provided to us. And Les, just to characterize this, number 3, protect important environmental and historic lands. You just made an amendment that really reflects what we're doing there a little bit better, with no amendment to what are the statements in there. So that looks good to me. And I'll open this up in just a second to other task force members. That I think is a friendly amendment. This does not change the substance of what we voted on already. And so without objection, I would ask the task force members to approve that.
So approved.
Yep.
In favor, Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, the next one, number 4, encourage smart solar development. I think that's a simply a grammatical change, and I think there's we can go and accept that less. And then number 4, this is a substantive change, so I would like the committee to look at that and discuss it. Number 5, reduce air pollution and climate change. This was Bonnie's recommendation. I'll just read it out loud. As a sustainable form of energy generation, the smart deployment of solar energy in the county will aid the county's efforts in reducing negative effects of air and water pollution generated by fossil fuels and climate change. So given that, Bonnie, is there anything you want to say additionally about that?
No, it was actually Les's suggestion, the verbiage here, which I thought was fantastic. I think it brings to heart one of the important things why we need to move to solar and away from fossil fuels. The only change I added was to add water pollution is a very real concern with fossil fuel.
Very good. I fully agree. Do any of the task force members would like to comment on this? Jeff or Mr. Thompson?
No comments here.
The only comment I have, always have a comment, right? Do we want to use the term climate change as that has some political overtones or whatever? Is there another term we can use? Or I mean, I don't have any big problem either way. But anybody have any thoughts on that?
I don't have any recommendations. I think it's. I certainly think in the community that we live in, most of who work in solar and renewable energies certainly think this is appropriate language. So I would recommend we keep it as is.
Okay, that's fine.
May I make a suggestion?
Yes, please.
Because you added "and water" to the last line, would it be appropriate to add it to the title of the section, reduce air and water pollution and climate change?
It's a friendly amendment. I accept it. So I think that would be a good idea that we do that.
Agreed.
Okay. I move that we accept number 5, reduce air and water pollution and climate change, and that we accept this principle.
Yes. Second.
Okay. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? For the record, I said aye.
None opposed.
Sandy, did you get all that?
Yes, I did. Yes, I did.
Okay, thank you very much. That then completes, if I'm not I think I'm correct, that we have now completed the principal section and voted on each of the principles. So I think we can now give that back to you, Les, to include in the report. Got it. Okay. Now we're moving on to the main items. I think we can, at this point, I'm going to turn it over to, in just a second, to Mr. Thompson. Before that, I'm sorry, before we get to the residential accessory solar, I know Mr. Knight, you had an update for us on the 1-year moratorium.
Yes, so your task force voted unanimously to recommend to the county commissioners that they adopt a 1 year from the date of your decision, your recommendation, which was December 9th. That prompted us at Land Use to draft a communication memo to Dr. Bridget and the county commissioners, making them aware, providing all background information, and we have drafted an ordinance for the commissioners to adopt. So we hope that will be on the commissioners' agenda on January 26th. It has not been confirmed, with them discussing it in open session on January 26th. Should they move in a majority to hold the public hearing, we will then have to advertise for a minimum of 2 weeks. The public hearing will be held. The record will be kept open for a minimum of 7 days. Then it comes back to a county commissioner meeting for final decision. So I predict that the effective date would be March 9th. Therefore, the ordinance has been drafted requesting a 270-day moratorium because it'll be 3 months between when you asked for it and you wanted it a year from December 9th. So we are still tracking to have your recommendation fulfilled by the county commissioners. So stay tuned.
So just a quick point of order on that, Harry. It was not unanimous.
I'm sorry.
Said nay.
Thank
Jeff
you.
Shaw had abstained.
Absolutely my mistake. Bonnie Kellenberger did not agree to the moratorium.
Thank you. Thank you. And just to be sure, there's no action for this committee, and you will not need anyone to attend the session on January 26th.
To tell you the truth, when we know for sure that it will be January 26th, I'll let you know if I'm given direction
please
to
do.
invite you. We, under our current COVID restrictions, myself and the director would typically not attend in person, but do it by WebEx. So it would be a WebEx invitation.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. And you'll let the committee, the Solar Task Force know about that.
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Okay. That's general recommendations. Unless, just to be clear, we don't need to make any changes. We made these changes and discussed them last week on number 2, correct? That's what was addressed in the global or general recommendations there. There was, I noticed, just some changes, and we discussed those changes last meeting, correct? You're on mute still.
Sorry, that is correct. This language simply reflects the amendments you adopted along with the recommendation.
All right. Thank you very much, Les, for that clarification. Now I'll point the task force members to residential accessory solar. We discussed and approved, I believe, the definition, but we, as a background, and I'll just say a few words, and then I'd like to hand it over to you, Mr. Thompson. We were concerned that the code, as written, could well affect really small households or lower income households that were interested in putting residential solar, especially on their roof. And what motivated this discussion was, could we modify the building code in a way that was acceptable to the fire commissioners and others, so that the setback could be restricted a bit on smaller roofs. And so we have a recommendation in bold, I believe, and I'll just read it and then I'll hand it over to you, Mike.
All right.
On occupied buildings require a 3 feet setback minimally on one side of the roof ridge. Also minimally 3 feet clear paths to the ridge front to back. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Mike. You've done a lot of work on this, and we have some other people here. I noticed, I think, Mr. Murgatroyd, we have is it John Nelson? We have Joe with us. So could you say a few words first, Mr. Thompson?
Yeah, as you know, originally we were looking at a 3-foot setback up each side and across the top, front and back, or depending on where your panels were. And the experience, if I would say in the industry, was that the higher you can get the panels, the more productive they are. They just get more sunlight. And 3 feet, I think they were originally in the front, had to be in the front or whatever. most of the time the panels are not in the front, but sometimes they are. So as this was developing, what we threw out there, ran it up the flagpole, if you will, is can we modify the code so that you can get 12 to 18 inches from the ridge, no matter what the size of the house or residence or building, it's more beneficial to be higher, and also could reduce the number of 3-foot wide pathways to that ridge in the case firefighters had to get up there. I think the response we got back was very accommodating. We're from what I see, we're talking about 18 inches from the ridge. So that's pretty close to where you want to be anyway. You don't want to be all the way up to the ridge. You start getting into wind issues and so forth. So that part was fine. And the other requirement that it came back with was that at least one path, 3-foot wide path, be in the front, so easily viewed when firefighters come on the scene. I think we can live with that as well. So. I think if this, what has been presented stands, I think is very acceptable.
Okay, thank you. We have Derek Murgatroyd. Derek, you're from the Office of State Fire Marshal, and was hoping that you weighed in and provided some suggestions here in this draft. Do you have any? Would you like to add to those suggestions or provide any additional advice for the task force?
Well, sure. I guess I could first start by saying that for those that may not know, the state fire code does not apply to 1 and 2 family dwellings. So just, that be known, there's, we don't have authority in 1 and 2 family dwellings. So anything I say here is purely just, recommendation. It's nothing to do with the fire code. Now, the fire code does...
Understood, thank you.
It has provisions for photovoltaic systems and fire department access and pathways in the fire code that address 1 and 2 family dwellings. However, because we don't have authority, those provisions do not apply. So those provisions do include pathways on either side of the ridge. Depending on the coverage, you are permitted to reduce that setback from the ridge to 18 inches, I believe, if you're not covering as much of the roof. But my comment about the ridge proposal is, and this is more of an issue for St. Mary's County Emergency Services and what they're comfortable with and how their operations work and that kind of thing. So, but just from a common sense standpoint, if I have panels on only one side of the ridge, that means I have to walk on only one side of the ridge. And so if we have first responders on the roof and say they, their primary escape path is by ladder, the way they came up, they'll set up a secondary pathway down the roof on the other side of the building. So if that primary pathway becomes compromised, they have to navigate the ridge, and so they'll be having to walk on one side of the ridge to get to their secondary means of egress should fire be coming out of a window near the primary. St. Mary's County Emergency Services, they may have their own ideas how that goes, and they may say it's not a big deal at all. So I don't want to speak for them, but that was just my my first take from that proposal. I had another comment about the PERS Actually, I think that's been revised. I didn't hear you say the word occupied, but I think I saw some language about it being an occupied roof.
It is in the text that the doctor read on occupied.
Okay. Okay, so I just thought it would be helpful to provide some clarity for that term, because that could get subjective in what is an occupied building and what's not.
And so you did provide in the, we have it in the document, the language that you provided for occupied buildings, correct?
I'm sorry, is that a question for me? What?
Yes, you provided that already, right? And that is in our document on.
Okay, yeah, I don't have access. I don't know what you guys are looking at. I don't know if everybody's seen the message that I wrote, or I'm just.
We do have that. Sorry.
I was just gonna speak that. I don't have a lot more to add to that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's good, and thank you. I appreciate it. Both the language, providing it, and your comments here. Les, I just want to we have that language on occupied buildings, so we're going to want to put that in as well to clarify this.
So just for my own clarity, I can work on that. With the occupied building language, I would need to know exactly what you wanted me to put in terms of a definition for that, and then also make sure I have the exact language with the offsets that the task force wishes.
That's correct. I understand that.
And
we have not yet made a motion or discussed it yet. And we still have, I think, Mr. Nelson, right, with us. And who else do we have with us?
Joe Gwyther and John Nelson.
Okay. And either gentleman we would like to hear your comments and suggestions on this. Mr. Nelson?
This is Joe Gwyther. Yeah, we worked with Mike and we did some coordination on this. And we looked at the fact that I personally felt that the residential requirements were, in fact, overly conservative, although I do agree with the fire marshal that you got to look at worst case conditions, and so you should have two means of escape, but it does not appear that the way you have modified the regulation precludes having the secondary means of escape. So again, we did some coordination on this, and we felt that it was reasonable for residential structures, and so we did not have any particular objections. So I will turn it over to John Nelson.
Thank you very much. Mr. Nelson, you're on mute. There you go.
Hey, sorry about that. So both, first off, from the fire marshal office standpoint, I would just echo Derek's comments as far as, I read his comments and would agree. Also, additionally, is on the other side of that, as a volunteer fire chief stance, I would also kind of agree with that because, the secondary means of egress is important. And I would think if it was the case where you're operating on the ridge, if you could only walk on one side of that ridge, that would be very awkward and could pose a risk. So, on both sides of it, for me, I would agree with those comments and look to go that direction if possible.
So, and just to clarify this, so our recommendation, and Mr. Thompson, feel free to jump in if I got this wrong, but our hope is to have it, to change this 3 feet setback minimally on one side of the roof ridge to 18 inches, Mike, right? And then minimally, you think 1 3-foot clear path to the ridge. Is that correct?
I thought we were going to have two. One was
Two,
required.
okay.
One was required in the front, but two clear paths.
Okay. So 2 clear paths, 1 required in the front, and then the second one either in the front or the back.
So
That's a question for you, Mike.
That sounds correct to me.
the way this is written, on occupied buildings, and Derek raised the question about, he suggests we clarify what we mean occupied by who or what, I suppose, but it requires that sounds like a single 3-foot setback minimally on one side of the roof ridge, front or back. So there's one along the ridge proposed, but 2 to the ridge. So those are the ones that would go up the side of the roof along the gable end, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
So 2 to get to the ridge, 1 on the ridge.
All right.
Well, just to be clear, I think what I mean, so we're talking about 2 different kinds of pathways. One that goes from the gutter to the ridge, which 2 of those are required. And one has got to be, if you look at our recommendations for what's shown in the fire code, one's got to be on the street side, and then the other one that goes gutter to ridge can be, on a rectangular building on any other corner. So the ridge is the second type of pathway, and our comment is if you reduce the pathway on both sides of the ridge, or in other words, if you only have a pathway on one side of the ridge, you're walking on that slanted surface versus straddling both sides of the ridge and walking along towards the other side of the building, for instance. So
Correct.
just
And then,
I think that's the point at issue. But
your second point, Derek, that you made is that with an 18-inch, that still would allow, right, that access on the ridge vent, so to speak, on both sides, correct?
Yeah, 36 is required on both sides of the ridge unless you're, and I don't have you probably have it in the email, if you're less than
That's
a
30%.
third, I believe.
Yes, less than 1/3 of the total roof is covered in
Right.
solar panels.
Right.
Then it may be reduced on both sides to 18 inches. But otherwise, you're going to have 2 36-inch paths on both sides of the ridge so you can navigate that ridge.
Right.
So I think what I saw from the proposal was that there would be the only real path required is on one side of the bridge. The other side of the bridge could be reduced to 0. Right? Because you only need it on one side of the ridge.
That's correct. The proposal is 1 36-inch on one side of the ridge, front or back.
Okay.
So perhaps an option might be to reduce it to 18 on one side and require 36 on the other. Yeah, I mean, you're free to do anything you wish, but like I said, I was just pointing out, it seems to me it would be difficult to walk a ridge on one side while the building's on fire at night and it's raining. You want to be able to put your feet on both sides of the ridge and get to the other side of the building and get down that other alternate pathway.
Understood
if I can
completely. Go ahead, Mr. Thompson.
Yeah, just one comment. Except in very minor, and I'm not sure what the purpose was, situations. Typically, you only put panels on one side of the roof line anyway, the ridge line anyway. So I've never seen any application, in a serious application, where you have panels on both sides. You look for the orientation of the sun, and typically it's well defined by the geometry.
Yeah, point well made. If this side is facing the sun, the back side is facing away, and you wouldn't put panels there.
Right.
Dr. Kane, so point of clarification, I didn't mean to invite Derek to put him in a potentially uncomfortable position providing advice about residential solar panels, because as he pointed out, the state fire code does not apply to 1 and 2 family dwelling solar panels. But I did want his information because Mr. Gwyther's email talked about commercial buildings, and that's where Derek has provided us what are the state of Maryland minimum setbacks for solar panels on commercial, institutional, multifamily buildings. And Derek will correct me if I'm wrong.
Understood and heard loud and clear, Harry, and my apologies to Derek if no intention to do that. Okay.
No, it's no problem. That's kind of the how it goes.
So if
Okay, thank you.
So again, if I may, I mean, we've heard from Joe Gwyther, representative of the St. Mary's County Fire Board. We've heard from Keith Fairfax, who unfortunately has not joined us tonight. He's the, I can't remember his exact title with the Bay District Fire Department, but certainly a long-term firefighting expert in St. Mary's County.
Water supply officer.
Water supply officer. And so while Derek's given us perspective of what the state fire code would say to other than 1 and 2 family dwellings, it sounds like we had a comfort level to go with our proposal. Derek's only reservation about our proposal, or very clear reservation, is we might want to clarify what we mean by an occupied building. It seems like that's the soft spot that might need to be firmed up.
Okay, understood. Mr. Thompson, is there, do you want to, can we task you with, for the next meeting, providing a motion that clarifies this, right? Because we would be changing unoccupied buildings require 3-foot setback. Isn't that correct? And we would be changing some of that language there, correct, Mr. Thompson?
Sounds correct, yes.
So let's do this. Let's task you with, I would ask you to provide Les with the exact language for next time and consistent with our discussion today.
Okay.
And we will vote on that on the next task force meeting. Is that acceptable to you, Jeff, and Mr. Thompson and Bonnie?
Works for
Yes.
me.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you, gentlemen, for your input. We very much appreciate it and needed it for this section of the residential solar. So the next order of business on that section is, I think, number 4, and I invite the task force to go to number 4 in the recommendations. And we, Les, we had agreed to this, and you've really, this is really about the statutory impediments to residential solar that maybe homeowners associations could somehow block. And as we noted, right, this is not really permitted. I think Harry indicated that that's part of state law, and you cite that state law. But I think really the issue is that maybe homeowners don't know about this. And so you added a sentence that said, homeowner education about existing rights under state law regarding residential accessory solar could be undertaken where appropriate. So some education here may well be in order, and this would be one of our recommendations. So I'd like to open it up to other task force members if they would like to comment on this and have any thoughts. Bonnie?
I think I'm perfectly happy with the verbiage we have here. I don't know what that would look like, but that's I leave that to our capable county professionals.
Okay. Yeah, and the homeowner education about existing state law, right, could be undertaken where appropriate, such as on the website, right, Les? This would be not high cost. We would just provide this as, recommend that the county provide that to homeowners in a way that's not costly. Is that correct?
That is correct. The task force did pass the language last meeting, what is in black, and there was talk about potentially some change to it with the stress on homeowner education is the cheapest way to implement this. So the new language in blue or whatever color you have from the printout there that's underlined is my attempt to try to just realize that, and this can be as little or as much as the county wants. Simply putting something on a website and to say, hey, homeowners, be aware of this. If your homeowners association says you can't do solar panels, this is a state law and you should have the right under most censuses to do it. And that's as simple as that. If the county wanted to be a little more aggressive with pushing out that message or some type of educational program, they could do that as well. The language, this extra language in the recommendation does not preclude how extensive the county wants to do this.
We have a resident expert. Jeff, did you have any comments on this? I know SMECO does a lot of education on this, but do you have any comments?
No comments, but we do have a lot of education, like you said, when our members reach out to us, perhaps they've been denied permission to install, that we tell them, here's where your rights exist, so.
Yeah, and it's Mike Thompson. If I may say, that any contractor, solo contractor dealing with any customer is well versed in this and would bring it forward very quickly.
So do you think are you both saying probably don't need that language in there?
I don't see where it's harmful at all. It could stay by me.
Yeah, I don't see any harm in it. I don't see it applying too many times, but it doesn't hurt to have it out there for those that have not inquired, for sure.
Okay, all those in favor, I'll make a motion to include the homeowner education sentence under recommendation 4 under the residential solar. All those, I recommend, sorry, make a motion.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
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 Aye. All those opposed? Okay, that passed. So we'll include that suggestion into that language in number 4. I believe the next recommendation here is number 6, which we tabled, and this was really this took up some time last time on how we can consider whether any additional county assistance could be provided. And Mr. Knight, I think you, in some ways, you've done some due diligence on this in the past month and reached out to some people in the county government. Is that correct?
That is correct, and received no responses back. However, it did jog my memory. And so what was included in your packets is the sprinkler tax credit that the county commissioners did years ago when they were trying to promote residential fire suppression sprinklers in new homes before it was mandated by state law. And the question that delayed the vote on this section last time was, we don't want to recommend something if the county commissioners don't have a mechanism to do it. And so I feel that I've answered that question for you. They have the power and authority to create such mechanisms if they think it's appropriate. So that by the time your recommendation gets to them next June, or this coming June, these types of questions always come up during budget discussions, and like we're in the midst of this year's fiscal budget planning, and then it goes to public hearing in May. So by the time they get your recommendation, the fiscal year budget will already be fixed for that year, but they'll have your recommendation for the coming year budget. And what they have to balance is if they're going to give people property tax credits to install solar, where is that going to hit them in the overall bottom line? So if they're going to give taxes away, are they going to recoup? This is a very tough time. Revenues are down for a variety of reasons, and yet revenues are up if we have needs to spend money on COVID, if you know what I mean. So anyway, stop myself from thinking of a joke about COVID versus solar. But anyway, so I think you have enough to go forward and include this recommendation.
So the sprinkler ordinance that they passed, that was a tax credit. This is in a sense, a model and an illustration that the commissioners can do this. And we would, if we were interested, we would have to craft such language for this.
Well, I think you're taking it farther than you need. I mean, I think your question was, can such a thing be done? I mean, that's the way I interpreted it. Here's the proof. It can be done. It has been done in the past. So I would say include your recommendation, because it's up to the county commissioners if they want to act on your recommendation.
They want to act on
then they'll have staff handle that in the future after appropriate budget discussions to decide how much they can afford in a coming year.
Do we need to indicate here that they do indeed have the authority? I don't want to, I want to make it easy for them, but also don't want to be, say something that I shouldn't, or us say something we shouldn't.
Well, so maybe so what was tabled is, it says the commissioner should consider whether any additional county assistance, parens, through ordinance or financial aid is warranted to further encourage residential accessory solar. So, I mean, maybe the commissioner should consider whether a future property tax credit should be offered to encourage people to. I mean, that's where you could be specific.
Yeah. Okay. And I think that my sense from the committee last time, we did want to do that, but I let other task force members weigh in on that. Would we like to recommend to the commissioners that they consider some kind of property tax credit on this? I'll let you go first, Mr. Shaw.
Okay. I'm fine with the proposal. I do have two friendly offers of amendments to the statement, and striking should and inserting may. And where it says additional county assistance, that's implying there's already assistance. So I would strike the word additional, perhaps, because it's already leading to me believe there's already something out there from the county.
Which there's not.
Correct.
Yeah, I reached out to the Housing Authority, the Finance Director, and the Department of Economic and Development, and I received two, I'll get back to yous, and the third one was silent. And yet they still haven't had time to get back to me. So, but I mean, and
okay,
I said,
so they're friendly amendment.
Yep.
The friendly amendments from Jeff, I think we can. It sounds like we could do that, and the commissioners may consider whether any county assistance, parens, through ordinance or financial aid is warranted to further encourage residential solar, such as reduction in property tax. Is that how we could put that? Or credit, property tax credits?
I would call it a property tax credit.
Right.
So can I add in one thing here, Mr. Chairman?
Please, yes, please, Les.
So I think deleting additional makes a lot of sense. The should consider language is kind of a term of art. It just says they should look at this. It does not hold them to do anything. At the state level, at least, task forces do not use the word may consider, because they may consider this anyway. If should is viewed as too strong a word, even though it is not meant to mandate that they have to do anything, they simply should consider, which means they can accept or reject anything and say we can't do it because of budgetary constraints, then this recommendation does not force them to take that action. You could say maybe the task force recommends that the commissioners consider whether any county assistance, such as a property tax credit, is warranted to further encourage residential accessory solar.
I think that's a very reasonable frame for that. So I'm in favor of it. Jeff, is that a friendly amendment?
Yeah, that works for me.
Okay, all in favor of this recommendation number 6 as mentioned by Les? I want to move that we put this in. So I move that this recommendation be put in as stated by Les.
Second.
All those in favor of this recommendation being included as discussed by Les, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? It passes. Number 6 recommendation passes. And I think that brings us to the end of the residential section. We already discussed military concerns to take that out. And I think we've already approved that. We have no changes to make in taxation recommendations. And I think we're good. We're good to go. Otherwise, is that your understanding, Les, of the residential solar?
Yes.
Okay. Any other comments by task force members on the residential solar? Otherwise, we're going to close that and move on to commercial, industrial, and institutional solar.
Yeah, if I just can add that, the national legislation just nailed down the 26% federal tax credit for the years 2021 and 2022. So that's in place, and a very good incentive.
Excellent, and I think Les, that would be good to include in the report, right? As well, as you know, we're going to discuss sort of. Generally some features about solar up front. So that sounds like something that would be useful to put in the front of this report. Thank you, Mr. Thompson, for recommending that. And if you can get a citation for Les, that would be great.
Okay.
Okay, Les, the commercial definition, I think really the issue here was number 4, but I'll turn it over to you to discuss this section, and then I think we can get Derek to weigh in. Sorry, Derek, we'll get you to weigh in now as opposed to earlier. So Les, could you walk us through a little bit this section?
Sure. So number 1 was passed. Number 2 was also passed, and I have with an amended language that was offered by Harry. So hopefully this is reflective of what was wanted for 2. Number 3 was passed, and then number 4 is the first one for discussion. That was tabled.
Yeah.
And I think the options, I think, of where the discussion kind of went was, do we need any of this language at all? There were concerns raised about whether any type of major renovation should trigger this or not. There was also one option of saying this should only apply to new construction, but there was a lot of discussion also about just rejecting this entirely at the last meeting.
Yeah, and that was my position because I thought that other requirements, building requirements, et cetera, would take care of this. And would a solar installer really install something themselves on a roof, right, in a commercial facility that could not could not bear those solar panels, and wouldn't they be liable anyway? So do we? I guess my question to others are: do we need this, right? And then if we want to get Derek to weigh in any way we can.
Yes.
So task force members, Mike.
Yeah, I was just going to say it's my understanding that the installer and I think a county requirement and so forth, that the structural analysis of some sort be done and approved by a structural engineer in virtually any solar application. So I'm not sure this would be of any added value if to come up with additional language on that.
Right. Right. And any other task force members?
Nothing to add.
I'm just going to reiterate what Mike said. I don't really see a purpose or that this falls within kind of the scope of what our task force is meant to be doing.
Yep. Okay, so that sounds like then without objection, I suggest we delete this this section. Les?
I've got it.
And then Mr. Knight, so would you say again some of the what what Derek can weigh in on here, what you recommend?
No, it wasn't so much this section of your principles, but just wanted him to provide information on what the fire code required for commercial buildings, since Joe Wyther had mentioned commercial buildings in his communication. But yeah, if you're not gonna, so Derek, the language at hand that the task force was considering including was for commercial, industrial, and institutional facilities, the county should require that all new roof construction and, to the extent practicable, a major renovation to an existing roof be able to support the weight of solar panels. But as you just heard, the task force has decided to simply strike that from the recommendation.
Understood.
Yeah, that sounds like it's getting into kind of the greening of building codes, and I think that's getting out of kind of the scope of what this particular task force was tasked with.
Okay. So I don't want to make Derek, you wait around much longer. If you were just going to comment on that section, is there anything we should be, the task force should be particularly aware about? That we have a definition, we have setback heights that we've discussed a little bit. We didn't believe that there should be special permits required beyond those that are required already, and then we provided a suggestion that the county should review all of its current institutional facilities on physical and economic viability of adding institutional solar. Is there anything that we should be considering the task force from your perspective on considerations on commercial, industrial, institutional solar?
PV systems on buildings other than 1 and 2 family dwellings are regulated by the fire code. So in those, installations, we would hope that there would be a permit so that there would be a mechanism for the for St. Mary's County land use to require a review by the fire marshal's office and taking a submittal as a normal permit would be, and we would review that submittal as part of our standard process. There's not a lot in here about PV systems, markings, the rapid shutdown stuff. The major thing is the setbacks They're increased to 48 inches on commercial buildings around the perimeter of the building. And you could see from the message, I don't know if I need to reiterate, that stuff. But, there's other pathways required for smoke ventilation and that kind of thing. And we would review that as part of the permit. We haven't done a lot of these, several in Charles County, and except for getting applicants to understand that there's a fire code with provisions. Once they get the provisions, I don't recall there being a lot of it being very problematic getting them to provide a compliant design.
Thank you. Mr. Knight, do we have such language already in permitting, or do you recommend that we cite this language and put this into our recommendations?
No, I would say we already have it. We would treat it as a commercial renovation to make a modification to the roof to add the solar panels. And our standard operating procedure is to include Derek's office in the review of those permits. But it's really very rare that we see proposed solar panels on commercial roofs in St. Mary's County.
So far. So
Yeah,
hope
so
that
far.
changes,
Yeah.
but yeah, so far.
It could change.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you, Derek, for your time today. We appreciate it that you came in and gave us your insights. And sorry I put you on the spot there with some of your colleagues.
Not a problem.
So if you get it, if you come again, I'll try to find a different type position to put you in, okay?
well, thank you for including us in the process. We appreciate the opportunity to weigh in, and we just we want to see safe buildings. So that's our. But
That's right. That's right. And we want safe solar installations as well.
Understood. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Take care.
Yeah, you too.
Okay. I think we're ready to move on to community solar, and we have a presentation. Francis, is it Uhas?
Very good. Yes.
Good. And are you from the Coalition for Community Solar?
Yes, I work for Turning Point Energy, but I am the co-chair for the Maryland Committee for the Coalition for Community Solar Access.
Excellent. Excellent. I want to thank Jeff Shaw for introducing you to us. And with that, we, as you well know, here in St. Mary's County, we currently not participating in community solar, but the task force in our discussion thought, as a matter of best practice, we ought to make recommendations in case that changes, either at the state level or that something changes that allows would perhaps encourage SMECO to agree to participate in this program. And so we wanted to bring you in to suggest, some of the best practices here and exactly what it is a little bit.
Okay. I guess before we get started, I'd like to ask a few questions. If you had the opportunity just to be, make productive use of your time, did you have any questions if the members had a chance to review the presentation that I sent you yesterday, and how I might be able to, tailor my comments specific to subjects or topics that you would be particularly interested in?
Fair enough. I think everyone got a copy of it and had a chance to review it. They may have it in front of them right now, and I do. Okay. So I'll first open it up to committee members. I think one of the issues is, to know what are some of the concerns that you found that communities have when they're pursuing community solar. We have a number of recommendations that we're going to go over here, but my understanding is that they always need to be less than 2 megawatts in size. And then, I think reviewing some of the key points of it would be helpful. of what community solar is for the task force members, and then any considerations that you think are important. We're going to talk about setbacks, right, requirements that we may decide on, and also any screening, et cetera. So if you have any experience with that or any recommendations, I would welcome that as a task force member.
Okay, great. So then I will go ahead and share my screen and I will go through the presentation. I will not go through the video. I assume you all can watch that on your own, but we thought it might be helpful just to give you some perspective of the farming community, since your first question was, what do we expect, or what do we hear from the community members? But, so let me know. I assume you can see my screen.
Yes. Oh, yes, I can.
Okay. Put it in. Okay. So again, thank you. Yes, I am the co-chair for the Maryland Committee for the Coalition Community Solar Access. I personally have been working in the solar industry since 2005, when I first put a 3.2 kilowatt PV system on my roof. I was one of the first grant recipients from the Maryland Energy Administration back in 2005 to help support that. Clearly, it was not a prudent business decision from an economic standpoint when solar was about $10 a watt. And now it's what, $2.50 a watt or less? So, and then of course the panel technology has certainly increased. Panel efficiency is up to what, 380, 400, maybe even 410 watts versus the 160 watt panels that I have on my roof. So we've come a long way, and I've learned a lot during this process, and that's where I had the opportunity to meet Jeff. And it was a wonderful opportunity to do one of the first larger ground mount solar projects in Maryland. So with that background, I'm going to launch into, the Coalition for Community Solar Access is really an association of businesses and nonprofits to further solar development, particularly community solar projects across the country. And with regard to your question about how community solar works, I assume that since you're the South Solar Task Force, you already know how solar works. So I won't go into that. But the community solar program is a little bit different in Maryland. It is administered by the Public Service Commission. And yes, in Maryland, the projects are limited to 2 megawatts under COMAR. And I think that's the biggest thing that we need to educate the communities and neighborhoods and the counties on, is that this is not utility scale. This is, 2 megawatts, about, 15 to 20 acres tops in land use, and an opportunity for people that are not as fortunate as myself, or as fortunate as the people that you're talking about, with residential and commercial opportunities to put on their own facilities. People that live in condominiums or apartment buildings, or just have houses that are just not conducive to putting solar on their own roofs, with, there might be tree shading, or their just roof configuration might be off, or the roof might not be structurally sound, or might be old and not appropriate. Historic buildings, you had mentioned historic properties early on in the conversation this afternoon. And you can't put solar on a lot of historic properties. So this is an opportunity for those people that would like to participate in solar and the clean energy economy to participate by subscribing to a community solar project. So, and I guess the other thing here is that when the subscriber gets their bill, the whole point is that not only are they supporting solar, but that they would also get a slight savings to the retail residential standard offer rate.
And if I may just add, I may have a question. Generally, when community solar is developed here, the developer may work with either individual subscribers or with an organization that can access individual subscribers. so that they can participate in this program. Is that generally correct?
I'm not sure I understand your question. So
if you have a lot of different people, right, multiple customers, right, you have to organize those customers in some ways. You have to query them, and that's got to be done by, an existing organization that knows these lower income customers, or by the developer who makes a suggestion to an organization.
yes, I'm sorry. Okay, yes, the subscriber organization. So by rule, they have to, the subscribers, so the subscribers can only subscribe to a community solar project in their service territory. So if it were in SMECO's territory, they would only be allowed to subscribe it from a community solar project in SMECO's territory. I'm in BGE's service territory, so I can only subscribe to a community solar project in BGE's service territory. But yes, the subscriber organization will solicit and market to potential subscribers, including low to moderate income entities as well.
Thank you.
And I guess the bottom line question that we often get is, what's in it for you? What's in it for me? Meaning, what's in it for the county? What's in it for the subscribers? What's in it for the community? And I think that the two most important things here are, number one, the opportunity to get a slight savings from your utility bill, and the local community impact with regard to the ability for a county to collect the property taxes generated from the solar energy project, which they can use for local initiatives and local infrastructure projects that they want to install, or however they decide to use that tax revenue, as well as local job creation and the local impact of having that money stay within the county. So the electricity is generated locally, used locally, and it's transmitted through the distribution system.
Right.
So there is just a real quick 3-step process. Well, I said real quickly, this process is not quick at all. So the first thing you have to do for a subscriber organization has to submit a project. So once they find the parcel of land or the very large rooftop or parking canopy for which they want to build the community solar project, they have to submit that to the Public Service Commission for approval to ensure that it complies with all of the rules under COMAR regarding community solar. And so once that the PSC determines that it complies with all of those rules, then the PSC will put that on an approved project list and send that to the respective electric distribution company for that, where that project will be located. Then the subscriber organization can submit an interconnection application request to the respective EDC to request interconnection. And that can take about 120 days to get responses back to see if interconnection is viable and would be allowed at that particular location. And then once the conditional approval is received, then we can actually submit our, we can submit our actual application to the CSEG, stands for Community Solar Energy Generating System. We can actually submit our application to the EDC for program capacity, to get that 2 megawatts of program capacity. The pilot program in Maryland is 7 years. It started in 2018. We are currently beginning year 4 this coming, probably next week. Year 4 will open. And then any project that was submitted for year 3 that did not get capacity awarded was put on a wait list, and then therefore would be eligible for capacity in year 4. Any questions there? I should back up. Okay, So then the typical life cycle of a project, that's the next project, the question that we typically get at the community meetings is, what can we expect from the time the project, the development process, construction, and then its operational life. And so it varies, obviously, depending on the state, the county, but since we're talking about Maryland, the pre-development process of actually just negotiating with the landowner and finding the appropriate spot to put the solar, that can take, I would say, 1 to 6 months. Actually, we've even had processes take longer than that, just depending, because there are some agreements that you should always have a lawyer look at and make sure that it's in your best interest. But we really do try to ensure that it's a win-win situation for both the developer and the landowner, because we're going to be, neighbors. It's got to be a collaborative process. We're going to be in the community for 25 or 30 years. So we want it to be an amicable and friendly and happy relationship. So then once we go through the PSC process that I just outlined, and we actually get approval for the project, we get EDC approval, we actually get capacity allocation, then we can actually start the development process. And depending on the county, again, that's totally dependent on the permitting process, the discretionary permitting process, as well as the construction permitting process. And that can take 6 months to 3 years. And that is not an exaggeration. And then the actual construction actually goes a lot quicker. The construction, I would say, would be probably an average of 6 months. And that, of course, is dependent on weather. When you start, most construction obviously would be preferred to start in the spring once, the rainy season has passed and, it's not so muddy. And of course, it's just always better to do construction in the summer and early spring and fall. And then in Maryland, the operational period for a community solar project is 25 years. And there are options typically with the landowners to extend in 5-year increments, but typically the minimum project life under the Maryland regulations is 25 years. And then once the project has has produced through its useful life, the project is decommissioned. And that is another, getting back to your question, the counties typically want to know, and the landowner as well, what happens at the end of the project life, what happens at the end of 25 years. And that would be decommissioning the project to make sure that all of the equipment is removed so that their land is basically returned to its prior condition.
And may I just ask, Franny, is there usually a bond associated with this, with community solar?
Well, oftentimes there is, but sometimes it's a belt and suspenders situation, because we have to typically, for most counties, require a bond or several bonds to be posted. So we have a construction bond, the bond associated with the construction of the system, and then there's often what's called a maintenance agreement. So, for example, in Montgomery County, once you get your certified site plan and you build to that set of drawings, construction drawings, at the end of the project, the county will come and inspect the system and make sure that you followed every letter of requirement and conditions associated with that site plan. However, there's often, you talked about vegetation and screening and things like that. So once the vegetation or any vegetative screening that's put in place, or the big one is stormwater management. And if there are stormwater management facilities that have been built with the project to accommodate the project, those typically have to be maintained, again, for the life of the project. So there's a maintenance agreement and easements put into place such that the county can come to the site and inspect those stormwater facilities to ensure that they're being maintained and working properly and managing the stormwater as intended. So there are typically bonds associated with that. So I just caution that you can get bond overload with all of the different bonds that are already required as a result of the system itself, as well as the landowner. Typically, there is usually some agreement within their lease agreement or so that they are protected. So, because obviously they're the ones that are going to be mostly impacted, right? It's their land that's going to be impacted if the system isn't.
Thank you. So in some cases, there does not have to be then a decommissioning bond. That can be an agreement between a landowner and
Exactly.
the developer. Okay.
Exactly. And then you had mentioned the low income and moderate income entities, and the Public Service Commission and COMAR has, when the design of the program, back in 2015 when it started, was very cognizant and conscious of the ability for low and moderate income residents to participate in community solar. So there are actually 3 buckets that we talk about with regard to the program capacity, and that is a category called small brownfield and other, of which 30% of the projects must be allocated to that bucket. There's the open category, which is obviously the most popular because that's basically your just open greenfield projects. And then the remaining 30% must go to designated as a low to moderate income category, of which of that project, that means that 30% of the kilowatt hour output of that project must be subscribed by low income subscribers. And that is managed. You were very, very astute. That is managed by the subscriber organizations, and there are mechanisms in place to determine, who is eligible for that category.
Okay, thank you.
And these are just some pictures of existing community solar projects that exist, 2 megawatts and use roughly about 15 acres of land. And you can see that this project in particular already has some natural screening from neighbors. This is all one property, but you can see the highway in the background there, and then the natural, the trees that are around it were already there naturally. Obviously, we have a lot of projects that are not naturally vegetated, and we do most county requirements according to their landscaping plans, and as part of the site development plan approval will dictate what the screening requirements need to be. And they also, you mentioned setbacks. They will also dictate, different counties have different rules, whether it's a 30-foot setback, 20-foot setback, whether it's a 50-foot setback from a wetland or a water feature versus just, a 20-foot or a 30-foot setback from a property line. So it's really dependent on the county and what their requirements are. But most important, what we're looking for when siting projects is, most important is, number one, is interconnection viability. Is that the site is near, phase 3 distribution line or within, say, 2 miles of a substation, such that interconnection would be viable, and that the utility can handle the capacity, can handle another 2 megawatts there. So we typically have to do, that's what the whole point of the interconnection application, and in order for us to get our conditional approval, they do that engineering analysis to determine if it can handle it. So in addition to that, we're also looking for accessibility, that the property can be accessed by, the required vehicular traffic and equipment that will be required during construction. But then once construction's over, this is the interesting part, that for the next 25 years, there's very little activity at the site. There's, perhaps maybe once a year, maybe twice a year, someone will have to visit for some either routine or preventive maintenance or to fix something that may have gone wrong. But there really is very little traffic once the system starts commercial operation. But location and proximity to utility infrastructure is important. Clear and open space. We have to minimize shading, whether it's a ground-mounted system. The trees, again, talking about setbacks, there's a natural setback because you have to be at least 30 feet from a tree line, so as to avoid shading from trees, from surrounding trees. And then, of course, if it's on a rooftop, then you have to ensure that nothing will be built around the existing structure that would cause shading for the next 25 years. So all of those provisions must be addressed in any lease agreement. And of course, you want the shape of the property to be, regularly shaped, a rectangle or a square. And you want to stay away, obviously, from wetlands or flood zones. And I think we talked about, the typical size, 15 to 20 acres, is the most that would be needed. And then, of course, topography is very important. Obviously, the flatter, the better.
And then you have a section on farmers. So in your experience, are farmers one of the large, groups that really, work with developers to do this because it can provide additional revenue for them?
Of course, and that is the number one reason. They love farming, but they recognize that in today's economy and today's society, that farming is really hard to do. It's hard to make it economically viable, especially if you have a small to mid-sized farm, but they want to keep the property in the family. So this is an opportunity for them to diversify their operation, particularly if they do have a larger parcel that they can set aside, 15 acres for a community solar project, and they can still, farm the rest of the property economically. It really is a win-win situation. It's a very collaborative approach, and then allows them to keep the property in the family, as well as, believe me, I've read, Gabe Brown's book. I've read, Dirt to Soil. I've read David Montgomery's Dirt, and I'm learning a lot about soil health and the microbial properties of soil. So this really is an opportunity to allow the land to lay fallow for 25 years, such that once the system is decommissioned, you have a beautiful piece of property for the next generation farmer.
Yes, indeed. Thank you. Yeah.
So like I said, we have great testimonies from Maryland counties that are featured in that video. And I guess just the other things that, typically are discussed with the landowner, obviously they typically get an annual lease payment for the property for the, 25 or 30 years. And, they can decide if they want to continue farming, depending on the acreage that will allow them to do so. Obviously, I'm sure you've heard all about the bee pollinators. And, we do typically, I think most all projects now will include the bee-friendly and pollinator-friendly vegetation. It just makes sense. Why not? And that also helps, that you're attracting the bees that the farmers also need to pollinate their crops. If they're, of course, a crop farmer rather than, just an equestrian center or dairy farm or something like that.
And that can that be put into the requirements for a county that they have bee friendly meadows when this is put in?
Yeah, we're seeing that more and more as zoning codes get updated, but often it's addressed again in the site development plan. It becomes a negotiation, honestly, that the county will ask during the site development process and make that a requirement as part of the landscape plan.
Okay, thank you very much.
And again, I think we talked about, soil health, is of the utmost importance, and solar really is a boon to the soil health and allowing that microbiome to regenerate over the term of the project. And we talked about the pollinator-friendly aspects of the project. So I think that was my, the last thing I wanted to talk about. I guess what I thought would be helpful is if you could share with me, what concerns you're hearing And, how might we address those as an industry and mitigate those going forward as you go through your process, and then just share some of your thoughts on where you are with community solar and thinking about implementing such a project or such a program.
Thank you. As you know, right? I mean, I think as you know, we don't currently participate in community solar here, and that's obviously SMECO's decision. I'm sure many of us would like them to participate, but that's obviously a decision for I think for SMECO. But I think what I would like to know, here, I'd like I've been asking all the questions and wanted to let other task force members sort of weigh in here. So I would invite them to ask any questions they have.
So I have a question. Do you have applications where there are multiple sites in one, like a multiple site in one project, maybe of a smaller acreage, 2 acres here, 1 acre there, that kind of thing? Have you seen any of that kind of application?
So that's a good question. Honestly, no, because it really does make the most economic sense for these projects to hit the maximum 2 megawatts. It is very difficult to make a project less than 2 megawatts to be financially viable unless there were some other kind of incentives to help offset the cost. Obviously, rooftop systems are much more costly than a greenfield ground mount project to do. Getting back to your other question about co-location, so if a project is on a brownfield or a landfill, or you can put up to 3 2-megawatt projects at that location if the acreage allows for it. Otherwise, in order to preserve the landscape and to minimize, one of the big misconceptions about solar is that, all of the open farmland is going to be blanketed by solar. And that's just not true. Again, these are not utility scale projects. These are small projects. And the PUC, or the Public Service Commission, limits that there cannot be one community solar project within adjacent to another community solar project. So you might have 2 parcels of land, but if they're adjacent to one another, you cannot have a community solar project on both of them. And adjacent has a fairly broad definition. It could be across the street, so there could be a highway between them. So they really did think this out and considered how we would limit actually the number of projects in any one, so no one community got overburdened with hosting all of the solar projects. Does that make sense? I probably could have articulated that a little better.
Hey, Franny,
Yes,
this
indeed.
is Jeff. First of all, thank you very much for agreeing to present to us tonight and sticking through the early portion of tonight's show where you had to listen to some other topics. I guess a question for myself and the others probably as well. When you're going through the processes, do you still have to go through the CPCN process at the Maryland PSC for all your projects?
We don't have to, no. That's the beauty, and that works both ways, beauty for us and beauty for you as the county, in that anything under 2 megawatts does not have to go through the CPCN process, which then I'm sure you've heard over the last year, there's been a big hubbub about the Public Service Commission's preemption, their ability to allow a project to move forward even if the county was not in favor of it. Although they do provide, deference and do consider the county's and the local community's concerns or questions about a solar project. the community solar projects really are permitted through the local jurisdictions.
Thank you.
Now, there may be one or two that have decided to go outside that route because they might not have gotten the answer that they were looking for from the county. It's like, if dad won't let me do it, let's go to mom and see what she says. But that's very few and far between.
Thank you for that clarification.
So I just had a quick point of clarification real fast. So you said that basically the maximum size is 2 megawatts, but you wouldn't want anything smaller. So basically any community solar project is essentially going to be 2 megawatts. No, thank you for pointing that out. You will see some on the queue that are, 500 kilowatts or 750 kilowatts. There are situations where a developer might be able to make a project like that economically viable. Particularly, and I'm just using this as an example. I don't have any specific statistics or examples that I can give you. But if a nonprofit, for example, was willing to, or anyone, doesn't even have to be a nonprofit, if someone was willing, just out of the goodness of their heart, to allow their land, whether it was a rooftop, a parking lot, or a barren piece of land to be used for solar for free, yes, smaller projects could certainly be financially viable. If there were some other grant, early on, there were Maryland Energy Administration grants to help some of the smaller projects and smaller communities that wanted to host a solar project to do that. So there are smaller projects, but in general, most developers will go for the largest 2 megawatts to get the economies of scale in order to be able to offer that savings to the ratepayer. Yeah. And I think that jives similarly to what Jeff Shaw had spoken to when he speaks about solar development in our Maryland region, that it needs to be a particular size for it to really be considered.
That's exactly right.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I have no further questions. If there are no further any further questions by the committee, by the task force members.
So I had one last quick question. So generally you call it the siting company or committee?
This subscriber organization?
Yes, sorry, the subscriber organization. Is that usually, have you been seeing that's more nonprofit or for-profit groups?
The subscriber organizations are mostly for-profit groups. Because they're the ones that are investing. They're putting the money up front to do all of the development, and they negotiate with the landowner. They go through the site development process. They go through the application process with the Public Service Commission. I mean, there's a lot of money to be spent before a project goes live, and so that requires a lot of investment up front, because you don't really get paid until you start generating kilowatt hours and selling those kilowatt hours.
Okay. And just a final clarification from my side, Franny. Can a county government participate in community solar?
That's a good question. I don't. So no one subscriber can subscribe to more than 200 kilowatt hours of a project. Let's go back and make sure I've got that straight. So where is it?
There, next slide, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was for the low, moderate. Yeah. So no one. Yeah, wasn't on this slide. So, but there is no one. Yeah, no one subscriber can utilize more than 200 kilowatt hours, and you can't have more, no more than 20% of the system can be subscribed by the maximum.
Got it. Okay.
So yeah, I think the answer is yes, but I think it would be in their best interest to do so.
Right. Okay.
It's a little complicated.
Yeah, and no worries there. And I appreciate your input to us. On behalf of the committee members, I want to thank you, Franny, for presenting and giving us your thoughts about this and what you thought was, how it works and some of the features of it. So thank you very much. And yes, indeed, thank you for waiting. We very much appreciate it.
You're welcome. And if you have any other questions, now you know how to get a hold of me, and we'll certainly follow up by email if necessary. But thank you very much for your consideration. Thank you for thinking of me, and have a wonderful evening.
Okay. Thank you very much. You too.
Thank you.
Good night.
Is there, I mean, should I go or should I stay? Do you still have things you need to?
Yeah, I mean, we're just going to talk about community solar right now and go through this document. You're welcome to stay.
That would be interesting. That would be interesting. I'll just go on mute and listen.
Okay, with that, let's get to, thank you very much. Let's get to the community solar draft, Les. And let's dive in right now, Les, if you don't mind, with number one, which is the definition of community solar. And Les and I spoke about this. There he is. And we were, the definition is to the right on your document here, which is, of course, just what the Maryland Code defines community solar. We were, at Les's recommendation, we were just simply going to reference the code and not put the definition in, partly because if the code is updated at some point, we would then have to update this document or a recommendation. So your recommendation, Les, is that we just, for definition, just state it as seen in this, the meaning indicated as a public utilities article of the Maryland Code, section 7306.2. I think that's reasonable. And I don't want to use any other different definition that you have under here that some of the other some of the other counties have undertaken. So do you want to comment on that, Les?
Certainly. So just stepping back for a minute, the way this whole community solar and the subsequent utility scale sections are, what I've tried to do is take all of the, pull out examples from all of the county ordinances you had in that original report, the background report, and the addendum. And rather than you have task force members having to parse through all of that, put them right here in the appropriate sections to try to give some ideas of how other counties have approached this. And I've done this both for the community solar section and the utility scale. Now, for community solar broadly, there is an education effort, and as Francis noted, this is a still viewed as somewhat of a, even though it's not a new technology, there's still both a public and local government education effort underway so that people understand this and that it is different from utility scale. And some of the examples here, many counties are still, as they're updating their code, looking to split this off. But in a lot of these codes, they're still lumped in with utility scale. And as Francis noted, they're not utility scale, they are different. And so as the task force looks at it, and it said, it makes a lot of sense to treat it separately as its own type of development. Having said that, as the chair summarized for the definition, that is defined very explicitly in state law of how Maryland defines what community solar is through this pilot program. And I think Anne Arundel County is the only county that really pulled it out as a separate type of entity and named it specifically. And they do reference that code. I think they add in some extra things that really aren't needed from a legal definition. You just reference what the state law is, and if that gets changed or updated, that will automatically be reflected in the local code. So that's the proposal as it is.
Any comments from task force members on this? Are you in agreement with this definition?
Yeah, I think it makes great sense just to reference code and move on.
Sounds good.
Agreed.
Okay, it sounds like we're unanimous on that. I didn't hear from Mr. Thompson. Do you
Yes,
agree,
I
Mr.
agree.
Thompson?
Yes.
Okay, so I think we can check that box, Les. The next is developer notification and communication requirements. So I think the question I had about this really was there really a need for it outside of other requirements that the developer will have. There was I think it was here, right, that there was a suggestion that perhaps the developer might meet with the community and talk with them. That would be a matter of course in some of the zoning, right, requirements. Harry, they would have to come in front of a zoning board, wouldn't they, to talk about what the plans were for the development of a community solar of a certain size?
Yeah, because we have it lumped in with all utility types, we have utility minor versus utility major, we would consider this utility major that would require a Board of Appeals public hearing.
Yeah, and I just want to ask the task force members, to me, it does not seem like we ought to have an additional meeting, in addition to that requirement. The public will get a chance to weigh in if they had concerns about the project at that meeting. So I don't, my own view of this, and I don't want to speak for the other task force members, I don't see it being needed, but I'd like to hear from others.
I'm in agreement. I'm okay with striking it and moving on.
Yeah.
Same. I mean, I don't want us to necessarily overburden a process that already exists.
Yeah, it's complicated as is, so, yes.
Yeah. So I think Les, I think we're in agreement to strike that. And so we'll take out number 2. And number 3, really, integration, grid integration, obviously that has to be done. They have to, at some point, come to Mr. Shaw and speak with him. So I don't think there's anything. Mr. Shaw, is there anything special we need to say here? I know since it's under 2 megawatts, we don't have to go to PJM. Is there anything we need to emphasize here? Obviously, the developer will have to come to you to present their, to give you their plan for interconnection.
No, I think we could remove this as well. I think Franny did a good job in her presentation walking us through and letting us know that the interconnection application is part of the process for the developers. So this is already covered in going through the process of community solar at the PSC.
Anyone else on the task force?
No,
Yeah,
I agree to strike it.
Okay. I think we're all in agreement, Les, to strike that section.
Got that?
Now we come to number 4, the next agenda item under community solar was where it should be allowed. And I think, I went through these definitions, Les. The one thing I would say 2 things. One is I would like to include language in here that references the study we are doing that's giving recommendation of where to site solar in the county. So that I would like perhaps cited here, right? Since we're going to have where we want it. Now I know Anne Arundel, I tend to agree that there are places where we don't want it for sure, right? And for example, in agricultural preservation areas, priority preservation, et cetera, right? Habitat for forests. I think there are some of the considerations that we do have to keep in, on my view. So could you say a few words about that? And then, of course, I don't know, maybe Harry can speak to issues of this other portion of residential districts and industrial parks and things.
Certainly. So, from my perspective and my research, it makes absolute sense to allow community solar in industrial and commercial zones. And I really think the question is, when you get to the residential areas, where do you want to allow it, and your agricultural areas? And clearly, I think allowing it in some of those zones, and I will have to defer to Harry on this as well, for the specific zoning codes the county uses, it would make sense to allow that in some of those areas. Anne Arundel's done a good job about kind of highlighting where within those areas, they don't want it. So, they talk about sensitive areas, habitat, et cetera, rural legacy areas, ag preservation areas. I think that's up to the county based on the amount that they have in these different areas, and would they allow a little bit of community within there or not. And remember, this is not utility scale, so you could have an option to say we might allow a certain amount within those areas up to some aggregate acreage limit or not. Or you could just say within those sub areas, within those zones, we're going to say no. And that's where I need a little guidance as to where you want to take this, and I can work with Harry to develop very specific language using the county zoning codes, et cetera.
So is this something that we want to table until we get our report back from for our GIS siting thing, and use that as work on using that as a tool to identify this?
I think we could. I was hoping that we maybe could include language in that basically almost like a flow down in a contract that cites all that information. But you're recommending maybe we table this till we actually see the findings provided by the consultant?
Yeah.
Okay.
We can walk through and visually identify, well, what does that impact look like? What does this, if we're following, how many folks know what their what the rural legacy areas look like, that sort of thing. Like, I think it would be helpful to look at kind of more of a visual of what, and maybe it's not after our report, or the assessment from the Chesapeake Conservancy. But I think as you're starting to look at some of these, as you start looking at these zoning areas and legacy areas that we have, and where we actually have easements and sort of stuff, just kind of getting the visual picture of what that looks like, I think can help us make determinations.
Yes, and I think I don't want it in those locations myself, right? And I think for me, especially with community solar, the question for me that I would like to hear other people weigh in on is, in particular, is the residential. I do think it could be appropriate to put it in some kind of residential areas. So, Harry, do you have any thoughts about that, about different zoning there that we have to consider?
Yeah, I liked what you suggested, that we need to make reference to our eventual solar siting map. So while Les has given us some guidance here on, a beginning framework, I could see that if we were to, take from our current zoning ordinance that it's allowed in certain zones And the part I would add, just brainstorming ahead when the solar siting map is ready, is on the condition that it is I'm going to use a term, a solar plus overlay per the solar siting map versus a solar negative overlay. Because we don't want to say it's allowed in these zones blanketly if our solar siting map identifies a bad location versus a good location. So I think the solar siting map needs to be included in the final determination of where we're saying they can be allowed. So the thing about this community solar is the more flexible, right? It's the more difficult to picture how big a thing we're trying to regulate, and therefore where should we or should we not put it. So can't be over 2 megawatt, and yet it could be 1.99 megawatt. So it might as well be 2 megawatt from the perspective of how it affects the neighbors. And yet it could be very small, right? It could be 750 megawatt, like she said, less than 1/4 the size of the 2 megawatt. So I would agree. I mean, I think because the size is so broad, we're told we'll probably not likely see small ones, but what if small ones become practical? And so, yeah, I think a broad range of zoning categories is appropriate. I liked Les's suggestion that maybe there has to be certain acreage limits in certain zones. She was describing that on average, you're going to need at least 8 acres approximately for the first megawatt, and most people are doing at least 1 megawatt. But anyway, so I do agree with Bonnie that you're not ready to make a final determination, but perhaps Les and I can work together to bring you a more refined framework to look at next month. And we do look forward to having the solar siting map the following month.
So would you see, I just, in, for instance, a subdivision application, there could possibly be a small solar, community solar system set up as part of the attraction of the subdivision.
Exactly. I mean, moving forward, we could have a subdivision who is required to provide certain open space.
Right.
And, perhaps as a solar incentive in our zoning regulations, we say open space can be dedicated to community solar. Oh. And just like they create, they provide a tot lot over here and have to preserve forest over there, they might offer up a community solar field for the community. The one question I had about this whole community, I'm going to take this opportunity to interject. So in theory, there could be, correct me if I'm wrong, but in theory, there could be a community solar facility in Charlotte Hall, but I, as a resident of Ridge, could subscribe?
Certainly, as well as anyone from Charles and Calvert.
As long as they're on the SMECO system?
That's correct.
Yeah, interesting. Do I have to pay to subscribe?
There is a subscription fee, depending on how the subscribing organization sets it up.
But then I think I'm going to recoup more benefit to offset my subscription fee and then some.
That's the hope.
Yeah. Interesting.
I think that's Harry, your point is well taken, especially about, I think, and Mr. Thompson, your point about perhaps a development that wants this. So I think let's as that plan. I like the suggestions made by both Bonnie and Harry and Mike, and we'll go back. We'll refine this a bit. Right, based on our maps that we get from the consultants, and that I think we do want to allow in some residential areas, right? And I think maybe we should think about what, some different alternatives for, limits, so to speak, in one particular area. We heard from Franny that they can't be adjacent to each other, right, in parcels of property. But there may be other, there may be a limit that we want to set, especially in, a residential area. So is that sufficient guidance for you, Les, to go back and sort of craft this a little bit more and bring it back to the committee?
Yes, I'll work with Harry on the specific zoning codes, and we'll start with the basic framework, and then once the siting map is done, that can inform a little more of the specifics and maybe looking at some limits as if, for example, you don't want it in a priority preservation area, et cetera. But I think with the broad zoning codes, I can work with Harry on that.
Okay. I think that's good. We're not quite there yet, Les. So we certainly welcome your further feedback on this for us, so that we can, maybe get a recommendation here that, that I think takes into account all the facts that we have. Okay.
Yeah, I would encourage everyone on the committee to check out the St. Mary's County GIS map that's available on the government website. It'll lay out land use, it lays out zoning, it shows you, the different metrics, with the exception of actual easements, conservation easements and agricultural easements. It lays out everything. And so folks can start getting comfortable with the different zoning and land use that we have in St. Mary's County.
Thank you, Bonnie, for that. Okay. Yes, thank you, and I think that's a good suggestion, and certainly homework for me, if not some other people. So I appreciate that. So that's number 4 left that we've completed, and so in a sense that's tabled again to get a little bit additional information. Number 5 is special exemption and conditional use. I don't know how this applies. And wondered if either you or Harry could discuss this a little bit. Do we want to consider special exceptions? Maybe it's too early to say that, given that we need to have the other recommendation above.
So this is really basically how do you apply for allowing a community solar project within a specific zone. And this really is kind of contingent on what St. Mary's is comfortable with. Other counties, with the examples and research I provided here, do it all sorts of ways. Some do it by special exception, some do it by conditional use, others it's just a permitted use or permitted by right. So you really have a lot of flexibility here. There's no real pattern or thing I can pull out from other counties as to say what is appropriate or not. So, Harry, if you want to weigh in on what you would think would be reasonable here, that could inform going forward.
Very good. So when we were discussing the previous page, number 2, developer notification and communication requirements, and it was, I was describing as if they were all conditional use before the Board of Appeals, which requires legal advertising, posting of signs on the property, and mailing to every property owner within 200 feet. But is that appropriate for the smaller community systems? And so we have 2 ways of requiring development to go through public hearings, and sometimes some development has to go through public hearings twice. So we have the Planning Commission. So if it was decided that a development of a certain size had to go to the Planning Commission for concept approval, that requires a public hearing. The other situation is then if they need conditional use. So there's times when they would actually have to go to 2 public hearings, once for the planning commission and once for the conditional use. I'm not advocating that. My point is, our director's feeling generally is if it's something that's going to be the slightest bit controversial and the neighbors would want to know, we should have a public hearing, but we shouldn't have to have 2. One should be enough. Now, to give you an example of something that happens in different levels of development that trigger different things. So here in St. Mary's County, mining is very common, gravel mines. And if you do less than 5 acres of disturbed area, you can have a gravel mine approved without a public hearing. But if you go over 5 acres, you need a public hearing. And so I think we'll look at this acreage thing again. And it's also usually, much like Les's examples, our ordinances is similar. It's also depending on the zone. Certain zones you think people need more notice, so you would require the public hearing. Other zones you think, like industrial or I noticed one of the counties calls it, I don't remember the exact word, but like a preferred development area. So we know we're going to have development there, so we shouldn't have to have a public hearing. It's just more development there. So I guess the bottom line is I think we need to work on this and flesh it out a bit for you.
And I agree with you, Harry. I agree that I would, in particular, what we're concerned about, I think, here is community solar near residential areas. And we would certainly want at least one hearing that allowed the community to express any concerns that they might have about a community solar development. So I think we could wordsmith that, and I think you're right. Whereas in industrial sites, it doesn't seem to me, right, or brownfield sites, that we're going to need a great deal of hearing on that, unless, again, it's close to some residential development. So with that, I guess we'll send it back to you, Les, to work with Harry on this, right?
Well,
unless other task force members have any additional comments to that on this number, on number 4, I believe.
Well, and that's what I would ask is Dr. Kane, you stated that that you're in favor of requiring a public hearing. It would certainly help if the task force is ready to have a consensus on that simple statement. Yes, no, or we're not sure yet, because then if everyone thinks a public hearing is appropriate moving forward, then Les and I can craft that more completely. But I don't want to push that subject.
Yes, and I understand. Thank you. Thank you for the prompt. And I think, yes, so I open it up for discussion then. That, in particular, if we put community solar near a residential area, my understanding from what you said, I don't want to force the developer to go through maybe 2 hearings, but I do want them to go through at least 1. And from what you said, I understood, Harry, that in some cases, they may not have to go through even 1. And so I would want language in there that would require them to go through at least 1. Do task force members have any thoughts on that?
Since it's a community project, I would say that would be appropriate that they have at least a hearing, inviting the general public.
Yeah, I would say that's fair. I think we could word it so if a public hearing is not part of the established process, it is a requirement for one to be conducted.
Thank you, Bonnie. Thank you, Mike. Jeff?
Yeah, I can agree to it. I see where it's needed.
Okay, so I think that, however little direction, Harry, we provided, I think that is, you could see where we're thinking. Maybe a question I have, do we need it for other areas other than residential? Apart from, the regular requirements, right? Would we need, so for example, in industrial districts or some other areas, we're going to probably try to not have them work in historic districts or other things, or rural legacy areas, maybe. So we'll have to wait, I guess, to find out what the Nature Conservancy comes with the sort of those categories. But does anyone have any other thoughts on the other areas that we should consider? Okay.
Yeah, I think that's I think that'll feed off of the answers that we have for question number 4.
Okay, so I think we have agreement then on certainly on residential areas that we want to have at least one public hearing. And so if you would, Les, working with Harry on this, we'll craft some suggestions. I'd be happy to work with you as well on this.
Got it. And yes, the feedback the task force is giving on these, certainly it is helpful and gives me just enough direction to start putting pen to paper on this.
So we went through, I think, 4 and 5, and now we have 6 and 7 remaining. I'm sorry, there's still more. And I think, we're already over 6 o'clock. I think if it was okay with task force members, we get through a couple more of these.
It works.
Bonnie, is it good for you to continue? It's after 6.
Yeah, I can keep.
Yes.
Mr. Thompson, we'll go about 15 or 20 more minutes, okay? Okay, so we went through 4 and 5 last, and now aggregate or individual size limits on projects. So Anne Arundel has some really, in terms of area, right? How much net area in a site or 20 acres, right? Whichever is less. So that's really less a requirement that the development, the 2 megawatt does not take up more than 20 acres. Is that correct?
Correct. And Anne Arundel is one of the few counties that has specifically for community pulled it out and defined it, I think, in a better way than just lumping it in as utility or basically similar in scale to utility scale. Kent is the other one I would highlight here, just noting that within agricultural zoning districts, they have a 5-acre limit. Now, as Franny said, that may not be enough. That's roughly at best 1 megawatt or a little under. That probably is not enough to make many projects viable. So they don't have any size limit in other allowed districts. You might want to consider, if you consider a size district a limit, it should be in a very specific set of zones. Broadly, I think you've got the hard cap already of 2 megawatts, so you're at most 20 acres at most, and you may do better as panel efficiency improves. That you may need a smaller footprint going forward. So I'm not sure you really, for community, need a hard limit across the board. At a minimum, either don't have one or just have one in a very narrow circumstance.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to set barriers to community solar, especially given that it's so infrequent. And so a size limit would definitely be a disincentive. So I think, and as Franny sort of indicated, I mean, the largest size is going to probably be under 20 acres no matter what, or very likely under 20 acres. So I don't think we should put certainly individual size limits on the projects, since they will naturally occur given the requirements of community solar.
I agree. I do not think that we need to have size limits. I think the limitations that we're going to place based off of zoning is already going to be a sufficient enough limitation.
Okay, if there's no more comments by other community, any task force members, then I'd suggest that we eliminate that, Les. Okay. Thank you. The setback requirements. So this is, I think, important, along with any kind of screening requirements that we've sort of heard. And so here, I don't think I've done a lot of work on this. I know, again, there certainly should be setback requirements, especially if it's in a residential area. So I feel strongly about that. And then you would think, right, that if a farm has it as well, there'd have to be some kind of setback requirement for the farm if there was an adjacent farm that was nearby. And so do you want to say a few words about what do you think are the principal considerations here on this, Les?
Yeah, so again, from the notes, counties are all over the maps with setbacks in general, and that is the same with community solar. Basically, and again, I think Harry can weigh in on this, on how setbacks go in St. Mary's, but I think a couple of key points to consider is in a residential area, would the setback for an accessory structure be sufficient? And again, we're going to be talking in a minute about screening requirements that will block this off from certain areas. And I think where you might have a slightly higher setback is basically where you would have residences directly adjacent to the project, and that you don't necessarily need setbacks as much in your agricultural areas or your commercial or industrial areas. But where you are adjacent to residences, that's where you might want to consider a slightly larger setback in conjunction with screening. A couple counties also restrict roads and have greater setbacks if there's a road or right-of-way from there. And again, I think the number, like Queen Anne sets it at 300 feet from the nearest lot line of a single-family cluster or a sliding scale lot. Whether that's appropriate or not for Anne Arundel is a question. Kent actually doesn't set direct, they just use the accessory lots in their zone, the accessory setbacks in their zones for accessory structures. They do have a height restriction, though, of 38 feet in the agricultural zoning and 45 in other allowed districts. No other county that I researched really does a height restriction that they've specifically put in for solar. So 50 feet could be a starting point of discussion and work from there. And I'll turn it over to Harry to offer the county-specific perspective here.
So we do have height restrictions depending on zone. And so I don't think we need to create special height restrictions for solar panels, because we already have height restrictions for structures in general. The interesting thing about setbacks is, reading that some of these places have pretty extreme setbacks, and yet that applies to a solar panel, but would it apply to a barn? So a barn, a very large agricultural building might actually be more imposing on the neighbor than some solar panels. Could actually block the view, cast more shade, what have you. So frankly, I think we should just let the principal structure setbacks of the zone apply. Now, generally speaking, and the reason I'm saying principal is because we already agreed in a previous meeting that accessory solar, accessory to the principal use on the property, because we were talking about the ground mount that's serving the house or the ground mount that's serving the office building. Those are going to use accessory structure setbacks because that is an accessory structure. But now we're talking about community that is, could potentially up to be 20 acres of solar panels. And so I'm going to use the mining example again. Mining is a pretty intense activity. Bulldozers, front-end loaders, dump trucks, noise, dust. The St. Mary's County zoning ordinance wanted you to have a 200-foot setback from property lines. Well, the state of Maryland says you only need 25. And anyway, other counties maybe had something larger too. And it went to court, and the mining operations won. The minimum setback for mining is 25 feet here in St. Mary's County, though the Board of Appeals, when it goes to conditional use, can hear the neighbors' concerns and ask for more because the neighbors are asking for more. But I don't think we should impose more if no neighbors are objecting. So I would go with the principal structure setbacks, and therefore wouldn't have to create any special setbacks. Because when you start to cut in, you're taking away, I wish you could see my hands because I talk with my hands. Maybe you can, I'm on screen. So anyway,
I'm following you, okay?
Yeah, it's Mr. Thompson's whole point about the roof setbacks.
Right.
If you start to impose these setbacks, you are taking away our opportunity to have bigger, more effective solar fields. So I would say we don't need special setbacks for solar panels. So if what Les could tweak it to say the principal setbacks of the zone would apply. Principal structure setbacks.
Got it.
Yeah,
That sounds good.
I think that's right, too. I agree with that, Harry.
Yes.
I don't want to put any additional requirements on here. And there are still, there's screening requirements as well that maybe have that we can address. And as you say, when this is brought forward in a hearing, if it's close to a property line, then people can ask for either greater setbacks or greater screening, perhaps, correct?
Yeah, that's the whole point to the public hearing is the public speaks up, says, don't you dare approve that, it's going to cause me all this harm, and then people negotiate, so that's when the applicant steps up and proffers, well, how about we set it back this much, or how about we screen it that much? And if they can work it all out there that evening, everyone walks away, satisfied to a degree. But yeah, it's very common in commercial development that these setbacks and buffer yards come up.
Okay, so I think we do have some. I think we have agreement there, Les, on to develop that with Harry and that language, and we'll vote on that next time. Screening requirements. So you want to say a few words about this? I do think there should be screening requirements under certain conditions. And so could you say a few words about that?
So every county that addresses community solar, either directly or indirectly, does require screening requirements. Typically, it has to be, while there's a fencing requirement typically for security purposes, for the screening is a vegetated buffer of very differing widths. Some are 10 feet wide, 6 feet wide, others are at least 50 feet wide. To me, it makes sense. Some like Queen Anne's literally has pages of their ordinance very specifically outlining how the vegetated buffer works. Others reference their landscape manuals. To me, I think you would want to, in a requirement for screening, say mixed vegetation. You can certainly take advantage of the existing vegetation that's on site. to do that, as was shown in the presentation example. You have a question here of would you want to require or at least have a preference for pollinator habitat as well, and also then do you use native species? Now the challenge with native species is that many of those are not evergreen, so in the winter months the vegetated buffer may not be there, and you have visibility.
Yeah. And Harry, do we have is there any models that we could use in the county to give us guidance on how big such a buffer the screening requirement should be, whether it's using existing vegetation or not? It does seem, again, that, it may be worthwhile in certain places. I'm not sure exactly where, certain near residencies, right?
Right.
And possibly near certain kinds of roads, if there are any scenic roads that we have in the county.
Right.
Do you have any thoughts on how big such a buffer should be and what should be the potential elements of it?
I think what I would like to do is distribute to the task force for discussion at the next meeting what our current buffer yard requirements, which does have special provision regarding the scenic byways, because we do have some designated by the state. And it is, so we have 3 buffer yards, A, B, and C. They come in different widths and different quantities of vegetation. Sometimes they can require a fence or a berm. And the way you determine which one you need is what is your proposed use, and we know what that is, and then what is the adjacent use that you're building next to. And when you see that chart and see the buffer yards, perhaps you'll think that that's adequate, or perhaps think it needs some additional screening. My experience is that our screening is pretty intense, and so we oftentimes have people going back to the Board of Appeals after their first public hearing of concept approval. They go to the Board of Appeals asking for their buffer yards to be reduced. So if that's all right with the task force.
Yes, thank you, Harry. I think that we would like to see those, and I think that if the task force members think they're, they can be tweaked to make them more conducive to community solar, then we can do that at that time. But I think giving those to us, I think, will be very helpful.
Now, what the other 2 points that Les brought up, perhaps the task force is ready to make a recommendation on that. Number 1, the pollinators and pollinator plantings, because that's not in our current buffer yards. And the other one was native species. That's not in our buffer yards actually dictate the need for some, a mix, but not native species.
So I would, personally, I would like to put in pollinator recommendations, not requirements, and that the pollinator recommendations be not part of the buffer necessarily, but the part of the site. So, for example, a recommendation to plant clover, in the field, and that would be pollinator friendly. And there's, of course, other species as well. Any thoughts from other task force members on the pollinator-friendly requirements?
Yeah, I just would have this, that you create a pollinator-friendly environment in year 1. I'm not sure what you have in year 5 or 10 or 15. Does it sustain itself? Is there a requirement to renew it? I'm just not sure how that works.
So the way other counties require this, and Franny touched on this, is for site planning, many, as part of that, moving forward, do require some type of operation and maintenance plan. And if you would do a pollinator-friendly habitat, obviously that would have to be maintained in some way. And I think her point that these are smaller facilities in a utility scale, you don't want to necessarily put too many financial requirements on it. You definitely will want to consider, and that'll be the next recommendation, is on decommissioning, and you definitely want some type of bond or other acceptable financial agreement in place for that. If you do operation and maintenance, and then what else is also thrown into the mix. And we'll talk about maintenance and operation agreements under recommendation 10, other requirements.
I mean, I think that's, as I said, I would like to see it recommended in some ways, but not be necessarily a requirement, and that be considered, that whenever a development is done, that they consider and attempt to put pollinator-friendly ground cover or around it. So I at least want that kind of language, but I'd yield to the other task force members on their thoughts on this.
So I'm going to jump in real fast. So rather than necessarily narrow it to pollinators, I would say that we would want folks to be practicing good soil stewards, more importantly than anything else, in making sure that how they're managing the land under the solar panels, regardless of whether it's pollinators or, as we've discussed, there's different ways to actually continue to farm the land. Sometimes some of that research is being developed. Is that I would encourage that we put in there basically soil care best practices. I think there's a different way to do that verbiage, but I think going more in that direction can make a little bit more sense.
Address farming issues, and we could also put that under other requirements as well, right, Les?
Yes.
Does anyone have any other thoughts on pollinator requirements? And I agree, by the way, Bonnie, I definitely agree with that and think it's a good suggestion, especially given all the farms here. Being able to say that, I think, is important. Any other thoughts on sort of pollinators associated with the screening or perhaps in the other requirements that people have any thoughts on it?
So as far as screening is concerned, is there an issue where you can get a little bit, I guess, extreme, I would say, low-level glare from sunrise, sunset on neighboring houses or buildings or whatever? That has that issue come up? Is that a problem?
That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that, and that would go. You're suggesting that there might be a height requirement on the screening, then, right?
I'm not sure how you solve it.
So most of the way the counties handle that is they do take into account that the vegetated screening should basically reduce the glare, make the panels invisible, and that's why some of them say year-round screening explicitly, which I think you need to have with mixed vegetation. You need an evergreen component there, otherwise you get no benefits from that in the winter months.
Okay.
Dr. Kane, your recommendation for pollinators, my experience is when we recommend people do things, they rarely do it. If it costs extra or deviates from their original plan. Thanks for the recommendation, but no thanks. Perhaps to phrase it that if you plant X number of feet of pollen, well, I mean, definitely the pollinator plantings between the panels can be done but getting back to the buffer yard or the screening, perhaps a certain quantity of pollinator planting would reduce your buffer yard? I mean, that's the way to get people to do something, is you got to give them something in exchange. Give me
Right,
20.
right.
Give me 20 feet of pollinator, and I'll take away 5 feet of buffer yard.
Right, and very, very good.
Just food for thought.
And shows you're an expert on this. I agree with that. And I think perhaps we should discuss this further prior to the next meeting, because I think we need to just sort of get a better handle on maybe some of those trade-offs that you're suggesting, Harry. And so I think we'll table that. I also want to note that I'm running over 6:30 here. So I think I might move to adjourn, even though we're not finished. Is that okay, Les? I know you might have one. You want to add any announcements, Les?
So at the moment, I think that takes us through the bulk of where I would like to get task force guidance. Some of the remainder recommendations are already filled in, or I think I know where the task force is going to go with them. So, yeah, that's more than enough for me to work with Harry and you over the interim to put pen to paper and come up with something more specific. I've got some general guidance here on where you want to go and where you don't want to go. So that's very helpful. The other just very quick general announcement would be take a look at the utility scale. I put in the similar data points. I expect that at least in some of these, the way you go with community will inform where you're going with utility scale, but there are going to be some other areas, I'm sure, that will be different because of the scale, scope, and size of the utility scale projects. The last update I'll give is for the next meeting, I would like to take a brief amount of time to give an update on where the PSC's rulemaking is with respect to the local zoning process, as well as several pieces of legislation that are in the Maryland General Assembly that could affect the the task force's work as well.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I think that's a great idea. Thank you for keeping us abreast of that. And I'm glad you agree that we gave you some additional direction for you to come back with some recommendations. And yes, indeed, the utility scale solar will certainly, we're going to have to run through that in detail, just like we did community solar. So if you have any specific suggestions, task force members, please share them with Les, and we will get them into that document before the next meeting. That's all I have. I would make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
I second.
Okay. All in favor? Aye.
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 All right. Thank you, all task force members, also our visitors. Thank you very much for contributing to this report, and your suggestions have been absolutely invaluable. And I very much appreciate everything that each of the task force members have been doing to help Les sort of develop and us develop, I think, a useful report for the commissioners. And thank you, Harry and Sandy.
You're welcome.
Stay safe, everyone.
Get well.